Good evening, Bruchim Havayim Rabotai. Welcome to another edition of our Thursday night's class. My partner and I sponsored tonight's class for the Refuat Shlema of a young boy who has a very rare genetic disease and needs a lot of Achmei Shamayim. Gabriel Ben Shani, Hashem tells us the Torah that we learn and spread, and whatever we get out of it should be a schut for this kid to make a miraculous recovery against all medical odds. B'meira, amen. I owe apologies for being absent in action the last 2 weeks. I very sincerely want to say thank you to many people that reached out to me to see how I'm doing and if everything's okay. I normally don't like making my personal life public because it's public enough as it is against my will, but I think people do deserve an explanation. It's true, I was not feeling well, and as a result had doctor's orders that I wasn't allowed to be running around speaking. But Baruch Hashem, I'm doing much better. Hashem shall further. And we're back in business. Now that we got that out of the way, here we go. Tonight's a very meaningful night to anybody who's normal in Am Yisrael. It's the Yahrzeit, the 20th year Hilula of Maran HaRav Shach, ZTZ B'kadosh Livachas, Zchutei Yagen Aleinu, Amen. As I've said many, many times in the classes, in different contexts and quotes and other things, I had the merit to literally be on Rav Shach's lap as a young child for a bunch of years. So I merited to have a lot of first-hand experience with Rav Shach, and it has a very big soft spot in my life. Interestingly, the way the Yahrzeit comes out now, like tonight, is exactly the way it was when Rav Shach passed away. Rav Shach passed away in the middle of the night on Thursday night. His funeral was Friday morning. Yeah, it's literally 20 years later. It feels like it just happened now. To sit and say stories about Rav Shach I did for many years. I think it's important. I think everybody should know every story that's available about Rav Shach. Rav Shach was the undisputed Gadol Hador of the whole world, not of Israel, not of one sect, not of whatever. Yes, there was a few idiots that objected him for a short while, but they don't count. But of normal people. He was definitely the undisputed Torah giant of recent Jewish history. I'm saying when we talk about Gedolei Israel, definitely in the Ashkenaz world. So there was the Chavetz Chaim, the Chazon Ish, Shach. That's really the way it worked. He also broke history in the sense that Hashem granted him with a very long life. It's hard to know exactly. I know on Wikipedia and other places they write when he was born and whatever. It's not so precise when you match it up with his legal documents. But the lowest age is 104 years, but it's more probable to say that he lived 107 years based on different things. And it's known, well, he was sick in a way that he was not able to learn, definitely at full capacity, for approximately a year throughout different points of his life. And it is known that he was sent to learn for the first time when he was 3 years old. So you take 4 years away from 107, that's where I got the title for tonight. He learned 103 years of Torah. I don't know if there's anybody else that we know of, definitely not in recent history, that had the merit to live so long to even be able to say that about him technically. So just by default, Rav Shach was a legend in that area. Many, many Gedolei Israel there were Torah giants. Even if they had a long life, they passed away in their 90s. Even Chacham Ovadia, like by us, that's a more close to heart thing because it was a Sephardic Gadol. He passed away when he was 93, I think. And the same thing with many others. So to be able to say about a person, he lived 103 years straight, non-stop. And even if he died as 103, that others say that that's what he was, so then he learned 100 years straight of Torah. One way or the other. There's no way to explain, there's no way to describe, and that's why it's definitely, if there was any biography of a Gadol that's extremely critical to know through and through, it's definitely the biography of Rav Shach. More so that Rav Shach's life was very hard. He never hid it. He used to speak about it very frequently in all his speeches in the yeshiva, that people should learn from it, that you don't give up and you fight hard and you can still become something no matter everything. Rav Shach beat the odds. He won 2 world wars and many, many other hardships, including losing his parents at young ages and long, long list of hardships. Excruciating poverty and things that make no sense. Shach once said about himself that in the yeshiva they used to drink white tea. So I once asked him, what is white tea? I heard of green tea, I heard of chamomile tea, I heard of many teas. Well, maybe there is something called white tea. I didn't Google it, to be honest with you. But I didn't know what it is. I still don't know. So he told me that the yeshiva couldn't afford to give them tea. The only thing they had was hot water, and even that was only if there was wood for the fire, for the stove. But they were embarrassed to say that they just drink water. That's what they live off of. So they used to call it white tea. That was the way they encouraged themselves. Today we don't get the 5-star meal and we're already striking. Like, I can't learn, I'm hungry. That was the difference between, that's why HaShach became HaShach. But if in one sentence I have to, this is not a fact, this is just my personal emotional attachment and feelings. If I had to summarize in one sentence, the world, or the way it reflects on us, with and without Rav Shach, there was a world until the day Rav Shach died, and there's a new world since Rav Shach died. And if I want to break it down into a shallow, practical term, I can bet anything in the world that if Rav Shach would be alive today, none of us, not in this room, not in my viewing audience, I wouldn't have a viewing audience for this reason by default, would have a smartphone, would know what YouTube is or be on the internet. Because all Rav Shach would have to do is get up in Panovich and give one scream, and that was it. Nobody would dare to do otherwise. Unfortunately, there's nobody like that. And therefore, all these, the trends just slide and slide to the point that we even turn the internet into something holy and kosher. We have Torah websites and Torah this and Torah. We took the pig by its head and put on it a crown. When Rav Shach was alive, that would never happen no matter what. It wasn't, the whole story about the reason why most Orthodox Jews until this very day don't have TVs at home doesn't come from a big fight or a long, prolonged dialogue. It came from Rav Shach getting up and screaming once by the Archikalo, whoever has television at home is behaving like a goy, and that was the end of it. Nobody thought of it. It wasn't even a consideration. When I grew up, it wasn't, do we have a TV at home or not? It wasn't an option. And anybody who's my age or older, till today, it's not an option. Even though there's no rationale in that, because once you have the internet at home, it's 100 times worse. But it's it. It's in your DNA. There's no way around it. That was the power. Everything he said was from his heart. He believed in it through and through. He wasn't willing to compromise 1 second, and that message relayed to people. And he fought the battles of Torah through and through. Those things are more known about Shach. The part that's less known, unfortunately, is that he was the most gentle man. I don't even know how to put it in words because it's so not relatable to because of the way we behave today. Shach was so sensitive to the tiniest thing, to a child crying, to a kid saying he's hungry, to a boy saying he's having a hard day, to anything. And anything was enough of a reason for him to not only disrupt his day, practically disrupt his life until he felt he solved whatever discomfort the other person had. And in theory, this doesn't add up because somebody who's such a Torah giant and studies so much and his whole life is learning and everything about him is learning, how is he even aware of what seems to be such trivial things around him? That's a real Torah giant. That as great as he is, he doesn't forget that other people are not as great as him, and that you have to lower yourself to the level of others and attain to their needs frequently. Shach was a legend in that. So I want to quote from you. Part of this was transcribed in a Sefer, one of 4 volumes of Sfarim that was put out from Rav Shach. I think the name is based on what he wrote in his will. It's called Machshevet Musar. Part of it that I had merited to hear in a speech once, and part that I heard in a recording. So we're going to blend 3 things that all have the same theme and come out with something nice. And you see where Rav Shach took his ideals from when it came to this sensitivity towards mankind. So the first part I literally want to quote in Hebrew word for word what was transcribed from what he said in the Sefer Machshevet Musar and translate. Ein ze davar kal ledaber lifnei acherim. These are the words of Rav Shach. It's not an easy thing to speak in front of others. Dolador, the giant of Torah. Not an easy thing to speak in front of others. Today it's also not an easy thing for most people to speak in front of others because they first have to get paid $5,000. And not always are people willing to pay them $5,000. I got news for everybody. Rav Shach never took money for speaking. Nor did he allow anybody to speak in the yeshiva that took money for speaking, just for the record. ובפרט כשמדברים בעניין שיכולים לומר, and definitely when we're going to talk about something that one can say, he was quoting Gemara, Masachet Bava Batra, Daf Tetvav Amud Bet, Tol Korah miben einecha. The Gemara gives us as an expression, take the beam between your eyes, meaning before you tell somebody else what to do, maybe make sure you're perfect yourself. That's, practice what you preach, simply put. This thing is annoying. Now again, this is Rav Shach with 100 years of Torah under his belt, getting up in the yeshiva and speaking, and the beginning of his speech is, it's not easy for him to speak because he feels that first he has to fix himself. I think maybe that should be a lesson in humility for everybody. That he says, but I want to show you what it says, meaning I'm not going to speak, but I will just quote to you what it says, and everybody should see on his own what it says, and think, and come to his own conclusions. Like it says, and he quotes a pasuk in Mishlei, right at the beginning, 5th verse of Mishlei. A wise man hears and adds knowledge, acquires knowledge. In these subjects, Shach says, and soon we'll see what the subject is, there's no benefit in just hearing it. The benefit is in the self-analyzation, in the self-thought, meaning taking the idea and thinking through. Sometimes you need somebody else to bring your attention to something. But after, everybody has to pay attention and think himself. And it seems to me that here, it doesn't even take a lot of thought. Just to open your eyes and see what's written, and to translate to oneself what it says. This is Rav Shach's opening statement to the message that we're going to relay, Lilu Nishmato, tonight. Now I do want to sidetrack for a second and say, relaying a message, Lilu Nishmato, has a huge power in Shamayim. Rav Shach wrote in his will. Part of that will is transcribed on his actual grave. It's not common that we write somebody's will on his grave, that he's asking from his students or anybody who benefited from him in any way, so any human alive, definitely any Jew alive, directly or indirectly benefited from Rav Shach, whether he's aware of it or not, to either learn one Mishnah in his memory, or even think about one machshevet musar, that's where this sefer's name came from, one thought of musar, or do a mitzvah, and he says, if I will be allowed to in heaven, I promise to repay the favor. So if we sit tonight and quote from the machshevet musar of Rav Shach, so it's a big schut for us, because now Rav Shach in Shamayim is going to repay the favor to us. That's a very rare merit that one can obtain, definitely so easily. And Rav Shach asks the question. He says, why in the entire Torah, we don't see that the Torah talks about, definitely not in very specific parameters, what seems to be the most important subject to discuss, midot, character traits. Yes, it does say that you should love your neighbor like you love yourself. Most people don't know what it means to love themselves, so they don't know what it means to love their neighbor. But beyond that, if you think about it, Torah talks about keeping Shabbat, Torah talks about putting on tefillin, about eating kosher, about so many things. About tarat mishpacha, countless things. Not to kill, not to murder, not to kidnap, not to embarrass. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't say not to embarrass, but all different. But when it comes to midot, the basis, I don't know, seems like the Torah decided to skip it for some reason. If somebody doesn't mind, can we close that door? It's just a little hard for me to concentrate. Thank you. So it seems like something that's so basic as midot, it's so important also. It seems like for some reason they just decided to skip. That's something that's we don't have to discuss. How could that be? Comes Rav Shach and says, it's true that the Torah doesn't discuss it in the format of mitzvot. Do this, don't do that. Do this, right? That's most of the Torah is like that. Don't say God's name in vain. Don't kill. Don't this. Don't that. Don't. No, in those contexts, the Torah does not discuss character traits. He says, but. He says, let's pay attention to the Chumash, 20% of the Torah, Chumash Breshit. In the entire Chumash Breshit, we have all of 3 mitzvot. Proportionally, that's very improportionate, right? 613 commandments. If 20% of them should be in each book, so in Chumash Breshit we should have over 100 mitzvot. In reality, we have 3. That's why is it like that? And even within the 3 mitzvot, the Rambam and the Ramban argue how you count them and if you count. Even those 3. That's why Rav Shach was very careful with his words. He worded it, they're not more than 3 mitzvot. So that means that's the most that there is. What's the rest of Chumash Bereshit? Stories. Torah went and took an entire Chumash, one big storybook. The story of creation, the story of Adam HaRishon and his relationship problems, the story of Noach, the story of Cain and Hevel before that, story after story of all the way down to the Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov on the negative side, Ishmael, Esav, the Avot, Yosef, going down to Egypt. The whole deal. One big story still. A whole Chumash, stories. I don't know. Torah Emet, every word is holy, every word we learn from. Whole Chumash, stories. Comes of Shach and writes that the reason why the Torah begins with a Chumash full of stories is because stories teach you how to behave. It's something that's easily relatable. And you can learn from the great how they dealt with situations and emulate from that when you have to deal with situations. And he emphasizes, he breaks it down. He says that every single pasuk in Chumash Bereshit, despite it seeming just like random information of stories, is a lesson that somebody can learn from in practical life in today's era, in every era. And he says, and that's a lot more powerful than writing commandments. Why? He says, because a commandment is a mitzvah of the Torah. That's the way that's the criteria he gives it. He says a story is not a mitzvah. So what is it? It's the Torah itself. That's deep, by the way. Not everybody understands what those words mean. He says, when the Torah gave mitzvot and averot, those are commandments of God. It's written in the Torah, but it's commandments of. When the Torah gave you a story that you learned from, that's life itself. That's the Torah itself. That's the essence of Torah. So deliberately God didn't write the idea of midot in commandments, because that would minimize the importance. By the way, this idea is proven in many places. The easiest place to prove it from is Midrash Rabbah. The Midrash says, Yafa sichatan shel avdei batei avot mitoratam shel banim. The casual conversation, we can call it, of the previous generation is more valuable, meaning you can learn more from it, than the Torah study of their children. Chazal say for many times, afilu sichatan shel talmidei chachamim tzricha limud. Even when talmidei chachamim have what seems to be casual conversation, you have to learn from it. There's something to learn from, because they don't have casual conversation. If the conversation existed, there's something to learn from it. So let's take a story from this week's parasha. It's time appropriate. Shach Yartzeit, Shach, parasha fits together nicely. It worked out for us. And see what we can take from it. Hashem comes to visit Avraham Avinu. We actually learn from that a mitzvah. Bikur cholim. Avraham Avinu is after the third day of doing a brit milah. Shlishi la milah is the hardest day. He's sick. And God comes to visit him. Comes up Shach and says, pause right here. Here was a statement that seems to be nothing. Vayira, Hashem came to visit Avraham. That's all it says. Vayira elav Hashem. But in here is a whole lesson. Then in Shulchan Aruch we have a whole simanan. The halachot of bikur cholim, all in those words. From a story. Hashem came to visit Avraham. We learned from here, Avraham was sick. Hashem went to visit him. You have to emulate God's ways. When somebody's not well, go visit him. And then he says, so you see that from every word you could learn something, and he continues with the theme. Where was Avraham when he went to visit him? So I would say, who cares? The Torah does say where he was, so that means it's important information. Be'ilonei Mamre. He was in the territory of Mamre. Why Be'ilonei Mamre? Why is it important to know? So Rashi already brings down Chazal that Avraham Avinu had a dilemma, and we'll try, if we get to it, to explain what that means. He had a dilemma about what to do about having a brit milah at such an old age. And he consulted with 3 people. 2 out of 3 advised him against it. 1 advised him to do it. And he went obviously with the one who advised him to do it. Mamre was the one who advised him to do it. So Hashem said, if V'amrei advised you to do the right thing, then we owe him gratitude, hakarat tov. And gratitude dictates how are we going to pay him back? When I come to visit you, I'm going to come to visit you in his territory. So now we learned a lesson in gratitude. We also learned the lesson in how important it is to give people the right advice. V'hu yoshev petach ha'oel kechom hayom. Avraham Avinu is sitting at the entrance of the tent. The tent was a house back then. Chazal learned why. Because Avraham Avinu was the biggest machnis oreach, the one who took in the most guests. And that day was a hot day. Hashem hotzi chama min al tikah. God made it extra hot, so guests people shouldn't be on the roads and they shouldn't come bother him because he's sick. He wanted him to rest. And when Avraham Avinu didn't have guests, instead of saying, okay, nobody's coming, I'm off the hook. I could sleep. I'm not well. He went outside his house to go look for the guests. He was proactively looking to do a mitzvah. So over here we just learned that there's a mitzvah called achnasat orchim, but not just achnasat orchim the way we do it today. If somebody calls me and I happen to like him and he's good company and he's not a pain in the neck and I happen to have an extra maid and a few more things on the list, let him maybe come for Friday night, and God forbid if he stays 1 minute after sunset, he's overstaying his boundaries and he's never welcome again. And that's the best case scenario. I was being very generous there. Avraham Avinu, sick, had a hard week, I can't have guesses. How many times I heard that in my life from people? It's okay, you must not be a child of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu had a very hard week. He was 3 days after a surgical procedure with no intensive care help. And no aid at home and no visiting nurse service. And he went to proactively look for guests. So we not only learn the mitzvah of achnasat orchim, but we learn how important achnasat orchim is and how much effort one has to make in order to find those people. And who did he find? He didn't know they were angels. He thought they were Arabs. It's not like he found the Baba Sali on the way. But even that was worth it. Okay, so now we got a little glimpse to this concept that when the Torah says a story, there's a lot of lessons to it. We just covered many simanim in Shulchan Aruch, not obviously the details, but be aware that there are many simanim in Shulchan Aruch that talk about chesed and achnasat orchim and bikur cholil, all these things that we just said, that we all learned from a pasuk in the Torah like that. Why is it like that? So we explain that when we teach things through a story, it's the essence of the Torah. But unfortunately, not everybody's intelligent enough to learn from stories. People can barely live up to their commitments of following orders. If any of you are employers and have employees, so you might know what I experience, you pay people, top dollar. They sign a contract that they're going to work for you and do their job. Even then you can't get them to do it. Definitely some nice story ain't making nobody do nothing. So why was it worth taking the risk, even though it's making it a holier thing and making it at the essence of the Torah? Not spelling it out as clear as could be. This is the way you should be. So I'm going to tell you something fascinating. There is a myth in the world, including the very educated Talmudic world, that in the Sephardic and Hasidic communities, they learn Kabbalah. They know things that are Kabbalistic ideas. But in the Lithuanian communities, they only learn Gemara, and even within Gemara, specific tractates, and that's what their expertise is in, but Kabbalah, that for sure not. Now, it's the biggest myth in the world. The Gaon Vilna wrote commentaries on the most complex things in Kabbalah, and he was the founder of the Lithuanian movement. So, by definition, the whole thing's a bunch of nonsense. But Rav Shach was the father of all the Rashi Yeshivot of the last 3 generations. Listen to how he explains this. He doesn't explain it with quoting a Tosfot in Baba Batra or Kivei Eger and Gittin. He explains this by quoting Reb Chaim Vital, a Sephardic Kabbalist. In a Sefer, that's a book that Reb Chaim Vital wrote, a Sefer that technically should be a Sefer in the realm of Kabbalah. In Sharei Kedusha, in Chelek Aleph Shar Bet, Reb Chaim Vital writes an interesting thing. And this could be a big wake-up call. Reb Chaim Vital writes, why didn't the Torah talk about midot openly. Do this, don't do this, behave like this, don't behave like that. Listen to what Chaim Vital says. Because the Torah was given livnei ha'adam, to people. And somebody who doesn't have flawless character traits is not a ben adam. He's not a human. So by definition, you can't command somebody to be human. You either are or are not. So the Torah couldn't write commandments that have to do with midot. Derech eretz kadma laTorah. It would defy the whole purpose. By the way, that fits very well with what the Gaon wrote years later. So tishkon Torah, that the Torah will never dwell, ela b'mi, only in somebody, shu reikam midot ra'ot, that's empty of bad character traits, umalei midot tovot, and is filled with positive character traits. What do you mean shlo tishkon Torah? You don't know a lot of people that are arrogant and know tons of Torah? You don't know people that gossip behind your back that know a lot of Torah? You don't know people that are selfish and do very nasty things that know a lot of Torah? I've seen people in a daf yomi who fight with the rabbi who's teaching them and disrespect them. They're sitting and learning Torah and they're doing live. I saw it in my own eyes. If I didn't see it, I would never quote it because it would be lashon hara. I'd never believe it happened. So the Gaon doesn't say that somebody won't be able to learn. Shelo tishkon Torah. The Torah won't dwell. It's got nothing to do with Torah. He knows a lot. Flash information, make faces. He knows this, knows that. The whole Torah is nothing. Zero. Not only that, Chaim Vital also explained somewhere else that it goes to the Sita Achra. He's actually helping the Tumah. On what? Not on the Mechalel Shabbat. The Mechalel Shabbat who learns Torah is very good. It's so good that Chazal say, Ma'ol Shabbat machzireu lemutav, it'll cause him to do tshuva one day, he'll become a Shomer Shabbat. And somebody who doesn't have flawless character traits. Shlo tishkon Torah, the Torah can't dwell. Now we understand why. Because Torah was given livnei ha'adam, to people. If you're not, in Yiddish to say a mensch. If you're not a mensch, then the Torah wasn't given to you, it's not for you at all. There's also a limud zchut in this. The progressive movement today, bnei adam, they're definitely not. So maybe that's the way Mashiach will come, that at that point they're all patur from mitzvahs, it's not their fault. That's just me being very generous tonight. How do you know this is literal and not just some exaggeration or some Musar idea or whatever? Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, that everybody here knows by heart. Perek Dalet, Mishnah Chaf Aleph. Mishnah Pirkei Avot says, Hakina v'atava, jealousy and desire, v'akavod, and the seek for honor. Motziim et ha'adam min ha'olam. Take even the greatest person out of this world. What do you mean? I know many people that are arrogant people that want to demand their honor, that behave in sick ways, simply put. Jealous, always jealous. They're alive. Mishnah says, Motzita Adam min ha'olam, take him out of this world. Why don't they drop dead? And when the Mishnah says something, it's literal, it's not an exaggeration. You know what the answer is? The Mishnah doesn't say that the person's going to die. The Mishnah says, Motziim tahadam min ha'olam. It's going to take his title of a human out of the world. He's alive, as an animal. Sometimes you could look in a room, and there's a lot of people that physically, externally look like humans. But according to the Torah, they're animals. They're not human, because they don't have proper character traits. Somebody's jealous. Motziat ha'adam, you're not a person, you're out. Ta'ava, you can't control your desires. Motziat ha'adam, you're not a person, you're out. You lost the title of Adam. Kavod, forget about it, yeah. Kavod is a big trap. There's only one way to deal with this problem of kavod, and that's to run away from it. Because as soon as somebody gets used to the tiniest drop, it becomes an obsession, addiction, I don't even know, the worst thing in the world. To the point that if it wasn't that the Torah commanded us to respect our parents and respect Talmidei Chachamim, it wouldn't be permitted to do so. It would be a sin. Because lifnei iver lo titen michshol. That's how dangerous kavod is. That's why the Torah had to give a commandment to do so. And gave a special protection in those specific circumstances that it shouldn't go too far, and even then, unfortunately, we see a lot of times it does. Shach also used to broke this down on an emotional level. He says somebody who suffers from jealousy, he has a life. So yeah, he's physically alive, but is he alive? He's dead. What type of life is that? Never happy, always miserable. He got a new car for 100 grand. Instead of being happy, he got a beautiful car. When the neighbor gets one for 120, it's worthless already. That's a life. Somebody's a Baal Tava. Kuzari already discussed this. If you want to take somebody who's the happiest person and make him miserable, there's an interesting way to do it. You give him a gift of a box that has in it 100 gold coins. And the box is built in a way that has space exactly for 100 gold coins. 100 gold coins is a fortune of money, for those who know the value of gold. But you only put in 99. From that day on, his life's over. For the rest of his life, he's going to be wondering and going crazy, where's the one gold coin? But you had nothing before this. Now you have 99. Be happy. That's the power of desire. Destroys everything. That's literal. There's also many psychological studies and similar ideas that prove the concept. So, Shach says, besides the fact that you lose the title Adam, you also have no life anymore. See, so that's called being alive. That's called walking dead. That's what that is. Comes up Shach and says, that's why the Torah didn't have to write these things clearly and wasn't able to write these things clearly. At the most, we're able to give examples from what the Avot did and the way they behaved, so sometimes we can learn practical advice. But that's as far as we're able to go. But then Rav Shach says, up to here, makes sense rationally, very easily. If I went to any random person, not even somebody who grew up in the healthiest environment or whatever, tell him, listen, he's a young child, he's in the hospital, he's very lonely, he doesn't have parents, he doesn't have family, he's sick, he's confined to a bed for the next 3 weeks. What do you think we should do? Even a homeless guy's going to say, let's go visit him. Let's send him a balloon, card. Anybody would say that. I don't give much credit to the progressives, but I suspect that even they would agree to that. If he's a baby, no, they say to kill him. But once he's already past the baby, then they don't say that anymore for some reason. And so that means it's a mitzvah, kucholim. But it makes sense. It's simple to us. It's a no-brainer, we'll call it in our language. Somebody knocks at your door. I'm talking about there's no safety question. In a situation where there's no safety question. You see a man, it's a hot day outside, he's thirsty. You could tell he's dehydrating. Do you have to think twice? Should I bring him something to drink? And now you run. You bring him something to drink with your whole heart. Not only that, you probably take him in. He should be in the air conditioning and give him 5 things to drink. 1 with sugar, 1 without, 1 this, 1 that, just to make sure he's... So Achmasat Ochim at its essence, it's obvious. Doesn't take much logic to that. To a certain extent, even animals do Achmasat Ochim, by the way. Go study National Geographic a little bit if you want the details. The same thing with many mitzvot. So then what's this thing that the Torah says a story? Because that's the essence of the Torah. What's the essence of the Torah? This is the essence of common sense. Doesn't mean it's the essence of the Torah. And here Rav Shach says, Grand Slam, I don't know how to say it. It's the only way I could title this. It's such a chidush, it's mind-boggling. So, he said it in a speech that's quoted in the Sefer Kol Machshav Musar. I heard it from him a little bit differently, and that's the way I'm going to quote it. Almost the same, but what a tiny difference. It's not a contradiction. He said many things, each time in a different variation, depending on the context. I once asked him, what's the key to having a good relationship? And I don't only mean a relationship as in a marriage, or a relationship with somebody, with a friend, with a partner, with anybody. What's the key to having a good relationship? Now, at that point, Rav Shach was approximately 100 years old. So he has 100 years of experience. That's the right guy to go to. Not some clown who went to some university and studied some theory of some nutcase. I used that term this week somewhere. I got myself into a little trouble. That's why I said nutcase without the name. But we all learned it in school. The people that analyzed it were animalistic creatures, and everything is based on that. So I thought Shach would start explaining me about the human interaction, about respect, about care, about compassion. These are all the things that I would have said are important factors of building a good relationship. And surprisingly, he didn't even say one. Probably because those are given. He didn't think I'd be wasting his time for that. This is what he explained. He said, Avraham Avinu, at the beginning of Parashat Vayera, taught mankind how to have good relationships. I was a little surprised. Avraham Avinu, at the beginning of Parashat Vayera, doesn't talk about relationships at all. If anything, the opposite. It actually, there was a little bit of an uncomfortable situation between him and Sarai Imeinu. How Shach explained. As we said before, Avraham Avinu was b'shlishi milah. He's sick after Brit Milah. Wants to do achnasat ochin, goes out of the tent in the heat of the day while God is visiting him to look for guests. Finds guests, tells God, thank you, have a good day, sends him off, and goes to bring in the guests. Chazal learned from here, Gdola achnasat ochim yoter mikabalat pnei hashchina. Doing the mitzvah of achnasat ochim is more important than hosting God himself. It's obvious that's what happened. He had a choice to either stay with God or to bring in Arabs. And he went to bring in Arabs because that was more important. Gdola achnasat ochim yoter mikabalat pnei hashchina. Lesson number one. But our observation earlier was he went out to look for them. He didn't wait for them to call or to ask. He proactively went to look for guests. Meaning, Avraham Avinu taught mankind forever that what does it take to be Amud HaChesed, a pillar of kindness? Not somebody who waits until somebody has a need and then goes and fills their need. Or until somebody asks for something and then goes and does it. That's human. If you don't do that, you're not even human, you're zero. There's no way to describe. You don't even deserve the credit of a description, quite frankly. Avraham Avinu went and proactively looked for a way to do extra. To be extra kind, to give extra, to sacrifice of himself extra in his worst situation. If somebody's in a bad mood, would they think of inviting their friend and serving them dinner? I'm in a bad mood. That's the head today for everything. I'm in a bad mood. Don't talk to me, I'm in a bad mood. Don't talk to me, I'm tired. Don't talk to me any time to process things. Don't talk to me any time for this. Don't talk to these terms. Oh my God. I don't know what to say about them anymore. Really? What's that an excuse for? I'd rather, quite frankly, somebody tell me, don't talk to me, I just got high. At least then I can rationalize. He has a chemical situation going on. You're in a bad mood? Congratulations. Do the right thing anyway. You're having it hard? Congratulations. That's more of a reason to do the right thing. Maybe if you do the right thing, you wouldn't be having it hard. I'm depressed. That's the head for everything. Suffer from depression. And you ever want to be happy? There's only one way in the world to be happy, and that's to be a kind, giving person. By conning your way out of kindness, you're never going to be happy. You're going to get more depressed and more depressed and more depressed. By being a compassionate, loving, caring person and getting hurt on the way and getting betrayed on the way, with all of that, maybe you stand a chance one day to be happy. So not only is that not an excuse, that should be the biggest incentive. I remember a few years ago, I was in Israel, and today I talk about being in Israel because it's been almost 2 years, very sore subject to me. But I was spending time in some hotel there, whatever, and I don't know who did this and why, but I guess one of my friends that was with me thought it was entertaining. He convinced the waiter staff that I'm a psychiatrist. That's false information. Here's the disclaimer, so we shouldn't have any legal issues. Not sure what his agenda was. Seems like one of the people was venting to him about some struggle. He said, see that guy, he's a psychiatrist, he could help you. So somebody comes to the table, one of the wait staff, and asks if after the meal, is on a Friday night of all days. If after the meal they could talk to me. You know, most people on Friday nights after the meal like to talk to their pillow. Myself included, by the way. I felt bad, but I said, fine. I said, but not for long. Let's make up in advance. It's going to be very defined. Yeah, sit down with the person. I right away realized this is a much broader problem than what's being presented to me. I said, listen, it's Friday night now. My head is halfway not here. Why don't we make up? You're working tomorrow night? No. I said, great, dinner on me. We'll go out. We'll have a malka. We'll talk. And then I have all the time in the world. Person agrees. Saturday night we go out. And I listened to a person's life story, which honestly, every minute was more painful than the next. And I didn't even live it, just hearing it. Nightmare after nightmare. Tragic what the person's been through. No human should ever have to go through things like that. And a lot of it was verifiable facts. I was actually doing so while I was talking to them because it sounded so far-fetched. Lost a parent in a terrorist attack. Crazy stuff, like crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. And he's sitting across from me, and at one point, and we're in a public place, in a restaurant, a busy restaurant, he breaks down, and I felt uncomfortable for him. And he says, I tried different things. I went to therapy, I went here, I went there. Nothing works. I literally want to give up on life. Tells me he only became a waiter because somebody convinced him that if he'd go and be around people and tourists and this and that, maybe that action and change of scenery and whatever would help him a little bit. So I tried, didn't help me either. So I was told that the naive Israelis sometimes think that Americans are so great and smart and rich and whatever else. אתה רופא אמריקאי, you're an American doctor. You help me. I said, אני לא רופא ולא אמריקאי. He says, there got to be something. Some medicine that I didn't take yet. He starts listening to me. I was on Prozac, I was on this, I was on that. Nothing helped. So there got to be some other medicine that you know from America. And then I remember the words as if it happened a day ago, even though it was either 5 or 6 years ago. It's actually in November, 5 or 6 years ago. He tells me, do me a favor, write me a prescription for a medicine that you think is going to help me. Now he's still stuck, despite me telling him 20 times that I'm not a doctor, that I'm a doctor. Ten li milsham, give me a prescription. I'm telling him, not just my heart, my entire essence was bleeding for the person. Tragic. I don't know. I said, I'm going to write him a prescription. But I don't have a prescription pad because I'm not a doctor. And I don't prescribe medicines because I'm not a doctor. So I took a napkin. I was on the table. We were in a restaurant sitting. Turned it upside down because the top side had the logo of the restaurant. Took my pen out of my jacket pocket. And I wrote him a prescription. And I'll write you all the same prescription tonight. Said, 3 acts of kindness to 3 desperate people 3 times daily. And I handed it to him. That's more or less the way the doctors write, right? 3 times daily, whatever. Take as needed. I didn't do take as needed. This is always needed. He looks at it, he's looking at me, he's angry. Tell him, listen, you're working in a hotel. A hotel that I stay in frequently. 80% of the visitors are young guys like me that come, families, whatever, wealthy. Yeah? But 20% of the visitors are seniors. They come to Israel either for the first time or if not for the first time to see their grandchildren that they didn't see in years and whatever else, and have certain limitations, whether it's physical or others. Struggle with the language, it's extremely common. And it's hard for them. When a person like that comes to your dining room, if you take the extra minute to explain them what's available, to offer them to bring them the food instead of them having to struggle to go to a buffet and wait online and come back, you'll make a huge difference in their life just by doing that alone. And you're here anyway, and this is your job anyway. Do it for the right reasons, for the right people. This is a 10-day trial. If the prescription doesn't work in 10 days, we'll change it. Let me know. I gave him my phone number, and we parted ways. Later on, this guy told me that he left the hotel, he went home that night, he cried the entire night. He said, I was his last hope. And his last hope gave him stupid advice. He said, you should know, you're lucky that I didn't commit suicide that night. This is what he tells me later on the phone. I was the final straw. You were the final straw. It was going to be all over. He said, somehow I mustered the strength to go to work the next morning. And the napkin was in my pocket. I said, you know what do I have to lose? My life is such a dump anyway. Can't get worse. Try He told me this about 3 weeks later. He called me. He says, and I've been doing it ever since. And I'm a new man. So I'm not on medication. I don't go to therapy. I'm a healed person. So the only thing I do is I don't follow the script exactly the way he wrote it. Instead of 3 times 3 people, I'm up to about 100 a day. He said, if I would tell you the amount of people that hugged me, that held my hand, that told me crazy things, like I came to Israel for my father's funeral, thank you for making it such an easier experience by bringing me tea or coffee or juice. It's unreal. And then he throws in a very cynical way, and by the way, I'm making a lot of money too, the tips are amazing. This wasn't my script, this was the Torah's script. You want to be a person, you have a chance to be happy. You don't want to be a person, you'll never be happy. HaRav Avinu taught us, don't wait for the other person to ask. You want to have a relationship? Proactively think, what can I do to better that person's morning? What can I do that'll put a smile on their face? And by the time they wake up, they'll already have something that'll make them smile. Somebody asked me an interesting question last week. I was very limited in my travel or communicating because of my physical restrictions then. But on my phone, I was communicating freely. And I sent somebody a response to a question they had asked the day before at about 3 a.m. the next night. That's when it worked out. So they responded to me at about 6 when normal people wake up. And they said, it's a weird time to respond. So I wrote back, when you saw the response, did you smile? So they wrote back, sure. So I wrote back, so why would I wait for you to wake up and then 2 minutes later give you a smile? You woke up to a smile, what could be better? Isn't that a better way of doing it? I said, what was the risk? That you would wake up from the noise of the phone? No, so you'll smile immediately asleep, even better. Would anybody think, let me leave somebody a message now, even though it's 4 o'clock in the morning, so when they wake up in the morning, the first thing when they look at their phone, they'll say, wow, somebody thought about me, somebody loves me, somebody cares about me. Somebody wants to see me happy in life. Oh, that sounds weird to us, no? Why would I do that? That's so awkward. That's how removed we are from anything to do with being human. Literally. Avraham Avinu taught us, what makes a person a Baal Chesed? Go out there, teach somebody a need that he has that he's not even proactively aware of, and then give it to him. That's called a Baal Chesed. And that gives substance and meaning to life. Shach was the ultimate example of that. With all his Torah and with all his strength and with all his power and with all his determination and even with his fights with certain situations that he had to stick to authentic Judaism. The softness and the compassion knew no boundaries. Literally no boundaries. I don't have to go too far. The fact that I was a young, troubled American kid that was hanging out in Israel for a few years. And I literally had an open door. Not an open door that I had to knock. He would get upset when I even knocked. Just walk in. Why are you even knocking? And if somebody of his grandchildren was in the house and told me, wait, my grandfather's resting, whatever, you find out about it, I wouldn't get the complaint. He would yell at him. What do you mean? He's the Gdol Ador, and this is the young, struggling child, teenager. That's what he should be busy with? That was a mensch. That was an Avraham Avinu. I said this many years, but it means so much to me that I repeat it wherever I go, whenever I talk about Shach. Except for 4 times, that's how much it meant to me that I remember, and I was with Shach over 150 times, for sure, maybe more. Except for 4 times, every single time that I went to Rav Shach, I never left the house without 2 bars of chocolate. 1 dairy and 1 parv. And he would always, each time again, would tell me the same words, Zeh sheyeh lecha matok. This is that it should be sweet for you. Many times, together with the 2 bars of chocolate, there was also a few $100 bills. Because he suspected, maybe I don't have money, maybe I'm embarrassed, maybe this, maybe that. I'll tell you even more than that, this is hard to believe. Shach was a very heavy smoker for most of his life. At one point in his life, a doctor told him smoking is not healthy. He took out his cigarettes, he left it on the side and said, I'll never touch a cigarette again. If it's not healthy, that's it, it's over. Never touch the cigarette again. If any of you know ex-smokers, I know plenty, I am one myself. Normally ex-smokers have something against smoking. They're a little, even more passionate about it because they did it themselves, and as a result, when you do something yourself, you don't want anybody else to do it, and whatever. When I was a struggling teenager, I used to smoke, and smoke a lot. And it was very obvious back then the style for men was to have a pocket on your shirt over here. Thank God that stupidity stopped for many years. And you used to keep your cigarettes in the pocket over here. So everybody in the world knew you smoked besides for the body scent. And if Shach is an ex-smoker, he should be the one to tell me to stop. No, a doctor told him it's not healthy. He should. And there were more than one occasion, I don't remember the exact number, so I don't want to say a number, that he took out money. For some reason, all the money he gave me, except for one time, was American money. Handed me money and said, Zeh sheyeh lecha lesigariyot. This is that you should have for cigarettes. You know what a great person you have to be and how in control of your emotions you have to be to go assist somebody to obtain something that you yourself stopped doing and believe is wrong? And to understand, but he's young and stupid and that's his need right now, so we got to work with it the way it is. So that alone, to me, is the ultimate description of compassion, because that I lived. But I know today people like things that sound heroic, and that doesn't sound so heroic and whatever. So I'll try and give you some things that maybe sound a little bit heroic just to, I don't know, make you feel better. I'm not even sure what. Hi. So here's the story. This story is brought down in a sefer called Torah Shashua. I think it's in the second volume, page Nun Zayin. I'm skipping the first part because it's not applicable. It's not part of the story. They bring a Avot Rabbi Natan that's very applicable to know, but we've taught it in the past. There was a girl in the United States who suffered from a tragic thing that unfortunately, including in our own Batei Yaakov, is very common, and it's a shame that it's not spoken about more openly. Eating disorder. I don't know why we insist on shoving this under the rug. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of girls in our systems of the Orthodox Jewish schools that suffer from eating disorders. Some from stress, from stupid schools that dump on them 17 subjects and homework every day. And others from issues with self-image. Severe issues from self-image. And it's an illness, that's all it is. And it should be treated because it's actually very dangerous. So this girl had anorexia, a severe case of anorexia. Her parents tried treatment centers, hospitals, this, that, nothing's working. At one point they lost hope, so when people lose hope, normally they turn to rabbis. If they would turn to Gdolei, I don't mean rabbis, this isn't what we call rabbis today, Gdolei Yisrael. If they would turn to Gdolei Yisrael before, they would never get to this point in the first place. It's like when somebody's sick, he prays to get healthy. Pray that you should stay healthy, you'll never be sick, you won't have to pray for that. So the father decides to take his daughter to Israel to go meet Rav Shach. Here's a struggling teenager who's anorexic, a female, and the father thinks of this quote-unquote brilliant idea, and I say that with a lot of sarcasm, to bring her to Rav Shach. What does Rav Shach know about American female teenagers in the high school system that are struggling with anorexia? Zero. But he had pure emunat chachamim. I'm going to go to the Gedol Hador, that's what's going to help. And the girl agreed, which is also a nes, by the way. Why would she agree at all? Definitely in those circumstances, why would she agree? Obviously, deep down, she was desperate to get help. They went to Rav Shach. Shach took them in. Didn't cost money, they didn't have to wait online, there was no gabayim. He took them in. Sat them down by the dining room table. Father explained what's going on with the daughter and whatever. And asked for a blessing. Told Rav Shach he wants a blessing, his daughter should get better. And then the daughter added on, please, give me a blessing, I should get better. Or I should be able to get better, something like that. Shach said, I'm not a Rebbe, I don't give blessings. Sorry. He used to do that all the time. I asked him for many blessings in my life, the answer always was, I'm not a, this is, brachos are reserved for Hasidic Rebbes. I'm not a Rebbe, I don't give brachos. I give advice, I give solutions, but brachos I don't give. Once I thought it was because it was materialistic stuff, so I asked him they should give me a bracha, I should be Talmid Chacham. Then he got really angry at me. said, if you'll learn, you'll be a Talmid Chacham, and if not, you'll be an Am Haaretz. No baracha is going to help. So true. Many Am Haaretzim today are because they got brachas. They were so busy with the brachas, they forgot to learn. I remember once I was by the Ger Rebbe. He's a very sharp man. And like the whole Ger, even historically, they're extremely sharp. But there was some sort of gathering, whatever, and it seems like by the Hasidim, when the Rebbe eats, they give out some leftovers. I think they call it shirayim or whatever. I don't know. Not my style. I was raised to eat with a fork and a knife, and I don't know, the whole thing it's not my style. Now, I'm not mocking what they do. It's very, obviously there must be some reason, which is beyond my understanding. So somebody passed me after like 10 people held something. He passed me like, do I want to bite? And I didn't even stick out my hand. I'm an istinus. The whole idea was, I don't think I ate for like a day after, just every time I remember the incident. Then one of the Gabbaim, which was in charge of taking care of me because I came on a donor basis, tells me, you don't want shirayim from the Rebbe? Shirayim means leftovers. So I told him my whole life, I aspire to be the main course. The leftovers other people could have. I got that from Rav Shach. I once told Rav Shach about something that he was eating, that maybe I should eat a bite, shirayim. He told me, Tiya ikar al tiya shirayim. Be the main course, don't be the leftover. Do it the right way. Again, I'm not here to mock what certain Hasidic Jews do. I have a lot of respect for each one in his own way. But interesting incident. I don't think Ger in the first place was always big on Shirayim or whatever, so it was just coincidentally, probably because of the circumstance that I was brought there for. But anyway, Shach's sitting there, this girl's sitting there, and he tells her, let's talk about why you're not eating. And they have a discussion. And she opens up to Rav Shach. Here's the Gdol Ador. He was in his high 80s at the point, and he's taking interest in some teenage girl with an eating disorder. From America, there's also a language barrier on top of it. Honestly, even if you spoke Hebrew and Yiddish, there was a language barrier from Shach because he had a very hard lisp, and if you didn't know the way he speaks, it was very hard to understand. He couldn't even say his own name, Shach. He used to say Shach. He's Blazer Shach. And they run a dialogue. Now Shach looks at her and tells her, I want to make you a deal. You're going to promise me that you're going to start eating. And I promise you that in 2 years, when you're old enough, you'll meet a very, very good guy who's going to have all the good things that there are, and you'll build an amazing Jewish home. Now, those who understand the psychology of eating disorders, not only doesn't that work, that actually might cause harm, technically, from a psychological perspective. So when the pressure is applied, whatever, you understand the way eating disorders work. And the girl wasn't so quick to say anything, exactly for those reasons. Then Rav Shach says, wait a minute. Gets up, talking about a man in his high 80s, the Rosh Shiva of the whole Am Yisrael, goes to the kitchen, opens the refrigerator, pulls out food, warms it up himself, puts it on a plate, brings it back to the dining room, serves the girl with a fork and a knife, and tells her to eat. And says, there's no rush. Eat slowly, whatever you could eat. I guess she was embarrassed. She took a bite. After she took a bite, Shach started praising her. Wow, amazing. Look, you were able to do it. It's unbelievable. Maybe one more bite. And like this, he sits with the girl for a few hours until she slowly, because it's very dangerous also, you're not used to eating food, to eat a lot of food, slowly eats bite after each bite, all the compliments and flattery, and the whole cycle starts all over again. The Gdol Ador, the whole Am Yisrael is laying on his shoulders. But a 17-year-old girl who has an eating disorder is what's more important than everything in the world. When this whole episode that took hours was finally done, now let's just realize one thing. Rav Shach valued his time. For Rav Shach, 5 minutes was like for us our whole life. Literally. Rav Shach accomplished in 5 minutes more than we will accomplish in our entire life combined. And with that level of living, it was still worth it to spend hours with a young girl who has an eating disorder. When they were done, he gives her again a blessing and says, Not just I bless you. Now that I saw that you ate, I promise you that's what's going to be. And then he tells her, but I want to ask you for a favor. And this favor is going to mean a lot to me. This is what Shach tells the young girl. So I like getting letters. Every day that you eat something, write me a letter and send it to Bnei Brak that should come to my house telling me what you ate. And for a year and a half, this girl said the story herself. And it's brought down in the Sefer that Rav Shach's grandson wrote. A teenage girl from New York was sending Rav Shach 7 letters a week. What she ate every day. But you want to know the crazier part of the story? Rav Shach was opening them and reading them. Because he said, if I don't read them, she will feel emotionally, even though she's far away, that I didn't care to read what she wrote. And obviously the story has a very happy ending. She's a healthy girl with a beautiful family and whatever. But to me, that's the least important part of the story. That's a Gdol Ador. Now, what would you think? What type of letters did Rav Shach get? The questions of the Ashkafa, of the whole Am Yisrael, of the most complicated Sugyot in Shas. He got all those letters, by the way. But he also got a letter from a teenage girl in Brooklyn who was struggling with an eating disorder. Because that's what's going to give her the motivation to do the same thing again the next day. And healed her. Where all the hospitals failed, where all the doctors failed, where everybody failed. He healed her. Can't argue the facts. That's what I meant, that Rav Shach didn't just speak. Rav Shach lived what he spoke. Its whole essence was what he spoke. And I want to conclude with 2 short stories. There's a rabbi named Gershon Bess, I think he lives in Chicago. I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, somebody is more than welcome to correct me tomorrow. And it seems like he used to go into Rav Shach a lot, from what I understand. He would fly to Israel and whatever, and every time he was there, he would go to Rav Shach. One of the times he was there, he said over the story, he came to Rav Shach, whatever, and before he left Rav Shach's house, Rav Shach asked him when he's flying back to America. So he told him. He said, within a week. He's going to stay for another week. So Rav Shach asked him, can you do me a favor? Rav Shach asks you, can you do you a favor? You start dancing. It's your happiest day in your life. So sure, what's the question? He tells him like this. Have a neighbor who has a son who's not well. And as a result, they had to move temporarily to the United States for medical treatments for the kid. And I feel bad that I can't do anything for them. But I know that his son likes a certain type of honey very much. So I bought it and I have it in the house. But I was looking for somebody who could bring it to him. Could you do me a favor and take the honey and deliver it to this sick boy? Really? This is the Rosh Yeshiva that said a shir that he prepared 3 days, day and night, non-stop, and didn't eat and didn't sleep. This is the Rosh Yeshiva that stood in Yad Eliyahu in front of 15,000 people every year and dictated what's going to be in the Orthodox Jewish world for the next year. This is the Rosh Yeshiva who saw the Chavetz Chaim, who went through 2 world wars, who learned with all the Gdolei Yisrael, who knew Reb Chaim Moise. There's no way to explain at all. This was the Gdol Hado, simply put. Honey for a boy who happens to be in America. There's no honey in America. You forgot that memo? But it wasn't honey. It was that Rav Shach understood that if somebody else needs something, I need it. Because I need ahavat chesed. I need to be like Avraham Avinu, to proactively look to bring to the other person what he could benefit from, even if he doesn't understand that he's going to benefit from. And in conclusion, I think that's why we can understand that Rav Shach was a phenomenon. Despite being the person who didn't say miracles or make miracles or promise things or this or that, or whatever. Very the opposite extreme of that whole style. He was the biggest miracle maker ever. He would say things in passing and they would just happen. I saw it, I don't even know how to say how many times. And here's an example. At one point in Israel there was a war, most of you weren't born then yet, the Gulf War. Saddam Hussein decided that he's going to take 39 missiles and write on them Nebuchadnezzar and send them as a gift to Tel Aviv and to other towns in Israel. 11,000 apartments were destroyed. Not one person died. But then they weren't only scared of the missiles. There was no Iron Dome then or anything like that. It was straight hits. Miracle after miracle. There were many books, by the way, written about all the miracles that happened during the Gulf War. They had a Patriot missile, wasn't so effective. The government gave out, they were scared of chemical warheads coming, because then they still thought that in Iraq there chemical warfare. So they gave out what they called gas masks. That every time there's a siren, it was called Tseva Adom. And they put on this mask, so in case there's some chemical warfare and there's missiles that are landing, people shouldn't die just from the inhalation of the air. And you had to go into what was called in Hebrew a cheder atum, a sealed room. Sealed didn't only mean that the doors and windows were closed. They would put a certain type of fabric that had a special liquid to close the bottom, and there should be no cracks, and there was a whole situation. So you'd go into a bomb shelter with no air, wearing a mask. And then an interesting question came up, that you can't wear this mask over a beard. And Safek Pikuach Nefesh. So do people who have beards in the Haredi world, should they cut their beards off? So they went to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky told them that in Bnei Brak, nobody should wear a mask at all. Forget about cutting your beard. There's no gas mask. And his words were, Ad Gvul Bnei Brak, until the border of Bnei Brak, Lo Yipol Til, a missile won't fall. And if you look at the map of the 39 missiles that hit Israel, many of them hit Tel Aviv and the surroundings of Bnei Brak, including Ramat Gan. Nothing crossed the borderline that was legally considered Bnei Brak's territory. Not one. Despite hitting the entire, if nothing hit the neighborhood, fine. But all around, but Bnei Brak wasn't hit. And you know what he said, why? He said, Ki bebnei Brak yesh et HaRav Shach, vegam til lo yachol lifgoa be'ir she'Rav Shach chai bo. Because in Bnei Brak, there's Rav Shach. And even a missile can't hit a city that Rav Shach lives in. People went to Rav Shach. And they asked him if they should close the yeshiva, maybe the boys should go home, because panic time and war. And Rav Shach said every boy should do what he understands. They went back to Rav Chaim Kanievsky, they said, Rav Shach seems to be a little nervous, he said, of course Rav Shach is nervous. Because Rav Shach doesn't know that there's a Rav Shach in Bnei Brak. I do know, so I have nothing to be nervous about. That was an Adam Gadol. He didn't have to bless, he didn't have to say anything, he didn't have to kiss his hand. His existence, just by being near him physically, already, game changer. No missile's gonna fall. And Gedolim Tzadikim mitatam yitov m'chayim. Tzadik has more power when he's not alive than when he was alive. So if Rav Shach was able to stop all the missiles of the world when he was alive, imagine what he could do now. And as I started, he clearly promised that whoever's going to learn a Mishnah or have a machshevet musar, he writes, even that, leilui nishmato, he'll benefit him from Gan Eden. You should seize the opportunity and take some benefit from Moreinu v'Rabbeinu HaRosh Shiva, Rabbi Eliezer Menachem Man ben Bat Sheva, Zecher Tzadik v'Kadosh Livracha, Zchuto Yagen Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael. Amen. Shabbat Shalom v'Orach.